I was the one who counted the bodies after Varkos fell. Not because I wanted to. Not because I was ordered to, though the order came eventually. Stamped and sealed with the Aquila and delivered to my station by a courier whose eyes had that particular hollowness I would come to know intimately. No, I counted them because by the time the Severan 44th finished their work, counting was all there was left to do. Counting and understanding. And perhaps that understanding is why I am telling you this now, in this cold room, with the recording servitor's dead eyes watching me and the chrono on the wall, marking off the minutes until whatever comes next. They tell you the traitors fear the Space Marines most. The angels of death, the Emperor's chosen. They tell you this in the scholar, in the sanctuaries, in the whispered prayers that mothers teach their children in the dark of the habitation blocks when the power rations run low. And yes, the Astartes are terrible. I have seen recordings of their work, grainy picked, captures that show figures in ceramite moving through defensive positions like scythers through grain. But here is what they do not tell you, what I learned in the aftermath of Varkos, and in the campaigns that followed, in the quiet conversations with captured heretics who spoke freely because they knew they were already dead. The traitors fear the Guard. Not all of the Guard, not the conscript mobs thrown into the meat grinder of planetary assault. The tithe, levies with their 3 weeks of training and their mass, produced lasguns that jam in the rain. Those, the heretics welcome. Those are what keeps the ammunition manufacturers running at capacity. No, what they fear, what makes the heretic commanders send urgent astropathic messages to their dark patrons, what makes seasoned warlords who have spat in the face of inquisitors and laughed at orbital bombardment suddenly grow quiet and begin moving their forces to secondary positions, are the elite regiments. I was an aide, de-camp to Lord General Pavros Thrain when I first heard the term ours applied fear doctrine. We were 3 months into the liberation of the Korvax Reach, a cluster of 7 worlds that had fallen to a cult calling themselves the Enlightened Path. Standard heretical nonsense, promises of freedom from the Imperium's yoke, whispered lies about secret knowledge and forbidden power. They had held the system for 11 years. 11 years of breeding a generation that knew nothing but rebellion, of fortifying every world with trenches and bunkers and void shields stolen from corrupted Mechanicus forges. 11 years of learning to fight, to kill, to die for their false cause. The initial assault waves lasted 3 weeks. 47 regiments from 6 different founding worlds, nearly 2 million soldiers, supported by armor divisions and Navy orbital assets. We gained footholds on 4 worlds. We held them for 9 days before coordinated counter-attacks pushed us back to our landing zones. Casualty reports came in hourly: 10,000 dead, 20,000, 50. The heretics knew the terrain. They had prepared for us. They had, as Lord General Thrain put it during one of those endless staff meetings, turned every kilometer of ground into a killing field. And then the Severan 44th arrived. I remember the morning their transport ships entered orbit. I was standing on the observation deck of the Hammer of Conviction, watching the tactical displays update with fresh disposition data, when the void lit up with new signatures. 7 ships, that was all. 7 ships against a fortified system that had already consumed 2 million of the Emperor's soldiers. I remember thinking it was a mistake. Some clerical error in the Munitorum's labyrinthine filing system that had sent a single regiment where an army group was needed. The Lord General did not share my assessment. I watched his face as the identification runes resolved on the display, watched something that might have been relief or might have been anticipation flicker across his weathered features. He turned to his staff, 12 officers, each commanding forces that numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and spoke 4 words that I did not understand at the time: clear them a path. The next 36 hours were spent repositioning our forces, not advancing, not attacking, simply clearing a path, opening corridors through our own lines, pulling units back from contested zones, creating channels of empty territory that led directly to the enemy's strongest positions. It made no tactical sense to me. We were inviting attack, exposing our flanks, abandoning ground that had cost us dearly to take. When I finally gathered the courage to ask the Lord General what we were doing, He looked at me with eyes that held a knowledge I was not yet ready to receive. "We are giving them room to work," he said, "and we are getting out of their way." The Severan 44th made planetfall on Korvax Tertius at dawn. I was not there to see it. My post was aboard the command ship, monitoring Vox traffic and coordinating supply requests, the bureaucratic machinery of war that keeps the guns firing and the soldiers fed. But I heard the reports as they came in. I heard the voices of forward observers, men and women who had been stationed in concealed positions to track the elite regiment's progress and relay tactical data. And I heard those voices change. The first reports were professional, clinical, contact established, Severan 44th engaging enemy fortifications at grid reference 774, heavy resistance. They're taking fire from 3 directions. Standard battlefield commentary, the kind of thing I had processed thousands of times during the campaign. But then, perhaps 20 minutes later, the tone shifted. Emperor's Grace. They're not stopping. They took a direct hit from a battle cannon, and they're not stopping. They're walking into the fire. And then, an hour after that, the heretics are falling back, not retreating, running. I've never seen. They're abandoning their positions. Heavy weapons, ammunition stores, all of it. They're just running. I learned later what the forward observers had witnessed. The Severan 44th did not fight like other Guard regiments. They did not advance in waves, did not suppress and maneuver, did not employ the standard tactical doctrines taught in every officer's scholar across the Imperium. They walked. They walked forward into the guns, into the artillery, into the massed fire of thousands of heretics who had held those positions for over a decade. They walked, and they did not stop, and they did not waver, and they did not die. Or rather, they died. But the dying did not stop them. I saw the picked captures afterward. Men and women in carapace armor the color of old blood, their faces hidden behind rebreather masks that had been modified with acoustic amplifiers. They made sounds as they advanced. Not war cries, not prayers, not the shouted orders and encouragements that mark normal combat. They made. I do not know how to describe it. A humming, a droning. Thousands of voices joined in a single tone that rose and fell with their footsteps. A sound that the forward observers reported could be heard through the walls of bunkers, through the sealed hatches of armored vehicles, through the hands pressed desperately over ears. A sound that the captured heretics, when they were later interrogated, described as the voice of the grave calling them home. The first line of fortifications fell in 4 hours, the second held for 2. By nightfall, the Severan 44th had advanced 12 kilometers into territory that had cost the main assault force 3 weeks and 40,000 lives to reach. And they had not stopped. They did not stop to consolidate, did not stop to reinforce, did not stop for any of the logistical considerations that constrain normal military operations. They simply continued walking, that droning hum preceding them like a bow wave, and the heretics continued running. I asked, once, what made the Severan 44th different. I asked a logistics officer who had served with them on a previous campaign, a woman with nervous eyes who had requested transfer to a line infantry division after her tenure with the elite regiment. She did not answer immediately. She took a long drink from her flask, something stronger than recaf, I suspected, and stared at a point somewhere beyond the bulkhead before she spoke. "They're not afraid," she said finally. "Not fearless. That's different. Fearless means you don't feel fear. They feel it. You can see it in their eyes, the ones who still have eyes. You can hear it in their voices when they pray before deployment. They feel it, all of it, every moment. But they don't react to it. They've had it, trained out of them, conditioned out. The fear response is still there, the chemicals, the instincts, all of it. But the part of them that would make them stop, make them duck, make them run, that part's been removed. Not suppressed. Removed." She took another drink. "You know what a heretic sees when they look at a normal soldier? They see a human being. Someone who wants to live, who fears pain, who will break if you push hard enough. That's what they're counting on. That's their entire strategy. Make it hurt badly enough, and we'll stop coming." But the 44th, she shook her head. "They see the same fear response we all have. The same human body, the same human face. But the humanity behind it, The part that would make us stop. It's not there anymore, and that's when they realize what they're really fighting. Not soldiers. Not even fanatics. Something else. Something that will never, ever stop. I processed her words. I filed them away in the part of my mind where I kept uncomfortable truths. And I continued with my duties, because that is what we do in the Guard. We continue. Korvax Tertius fell in 9 days. The Severan 44th swept through the Heretic defensive lines like a plague through an underhive, that terrible humming never ceasing. Their casualties mounting but their advance never slowing. I watched the tactical displays update in real time, watched the enemy disposition markers retreat and scatter and finally wink out entirely, and I began to understand what Lord General Thrain had meant when he said we were giving them room to work. We were not their support. We were their audience. We were there to witness, to learn, and to handle the administrative burden of what came after. The counting, as I said, was my task. I made planetfall 3 days after the last organized resistance on Korvax Tertius collapsed. The smell hit me before the shuttle's ramp had fully lowered, a sweetness underlaid with something chemical, something that burned the back of the throat and made the eyes water. Promethium, I realized. Promethium and burned flesh and the particular ozone tang of mass discharge las fire. The smell of a world that had been scarred. My orders were simple. Assess the enemy dead, compile casualty reports, prepare data for the Munitorum. Standard post-battle documentation. The kind of thing that junior aides handle so that senior officers can focus on the next campaign. I had done it before. I thought I knew what to expect. I did not. The first thing I noticed was the positions. The bodies of the Heretic defenders were not scattered randomly across the battlefield, were not clustered in the defensive positions where they had fallen fighting. They were arranged. Ranks upon ranks of corpses laid out in precise geometric patterns, their arms crossed over their chests, their faces, those who still had faces, turned upward toward the sky, thousands of them, arranged with a care and precision that spoke of hours of labor. The Severan 44th's quartermaster found me standing at the edge of one such formation. My data, slate hanging forgotten at my side. He was an older man, his face half hidden behind augmetic implants that clicked and whirred as he spoke. We always do this, he said, following my gaze across the field of arranged dead. After, they need to be counted, yes. Need to be documented, processed, the proper forms filed. But they also need to be honored. I did not understand. These were traitors, heretics, enemies of the Imperium who had turned their backs on the Emperor's light. Why would? They were human. The quartermaster said, as if reading my thoughts. Before they were traitors, they were human. They made a choice. A wrong choice. But they made it because they were afraid or angry or desperate. Because someone promised them something better, and they were foolish enough to believe it. He paused, those mechanical eyes focusing on something I could not see. We don't hate them. That's what makes us dangerous. That's what makes us terrifying to their commanders, to the ones who convinced them to rebel. We don't hate them. We understand them, and we kill them anyway, because that is our duty. Because the Emperor requires it. And when we're done, we honor the humanity they threw away. He turned to me then, and I saw something in those augmetic eyes that I did not expect. Sadness. A deep, abiding sadness that seemed to reach back through years of campaigns, of battles, of fields like this one covered in arranged dead. You're counting them, he said. Good. Count carefully. Document each one. They deserve that much, at least. They deserved better than the lies that led them here, but they will receive what we can give them. A number. A record. Proof that they existed, that they mattered enough for the Imperium to send us to stop them. A pause. That's the real weapon, you know. Not the Lazarifals. Not the tanks. Not even the conditioning that lets us walk through fire without flinching. It's the fact that we have care. We care about every single one of them, in our way. And they know it. The heretic commanders. The ones who manipulate and deceive and send their followers to die for false promises. They know that we will come for every single life they corrupt. That we will not stop until the ledger is balanced. I spent 17 days on Korvax Tertius. I counted 847,293 bodies. I documented their positions, their causes of death, the unit markings on their stolen uniforms and corrupted equipment. I learned to recognize the pattern of kills that marked the Severan 44th's passing. Center mass shots, precise and economical, no wasted ammunition, no overkill. Clean deaths, as clean as last fire could make them. Merciful, in a way that seemed almost paradoxical given the regiment's fearsome reputation. And I learned, in those 17 days, why the heretic commanders feared them. It was not the conditioning, not the absence of fear, not the relentless advance, not even the unnerving hum that preceded their attacks. Those were symptoms. The disease, if you could call it that, went deeper. The Severan 44th were true believers, not fanatics, not zealots, not the screaming devotees who threw themselves into battle crying the Emperor's name and expecting martyrdom to wash away their sins. They believed in something quieter, something more terrible. They believed in duty, in purpose, in the absolute necessity of what they did, and the absolute worthlessness of their own individual lives in the face of that duty. They did not fight to survive. They did not fight for glory or advancement or the hope of returning home to worlds they had left behind decades ago. They fought because fighting was what they were created to do, and they would continue fighting until they were destroyed or until there was nothing left to fight. Not with anger, not with hatred, with the calm, methodical purpose of a machine designed for a single function. And that, I came to understand, was what terrified the heretic commanders. Not the violence. They had seen violence, had inflicted it themselves, had become inured to its horrors. What terrified them was the humanity of it. The fact that these soldiers, these men and women who had been remade into weapons, still cared, still honored the dead, still counted the bodies, still treated the war as something more than simple destruction. A space marine is a terror because he is beyond humanity, a weapon of flesh and ceramite that descends from the heavens to deliver the Emperor's judgment. The heretics can understand that. They can conceptualize it, fit it into their worldview, find ways to rationalize their fear and channel it into resistance. But the Severan 44th, and regiments like them, the elite forces of the Astra Militarum, who have been honed into something more than soldiers, but less than monsters, they are human. Clearly, obviously human. They bleed, they tire, they feel pain and fear and doubt, and yet they come anyway. They walk through the fire, and they do not stop, and they do not waver, and when it is over they arrange the dead with reverent care, and count every single one. That is what the heretic commanders cannot understand, cannot rationalize, cannot fit into any framework that allows them to believe they might win. Because if human beings can be made to do this, to accept death, to embrace it, to walk toward it with open eyes and steady hands, then what defense can there be? What promise of power or freedom or knowledge can stand against enemies who have already given up everything they are? I served with the Severan 44th for the remainder of the Korvax campaign. 5 more worlds, 18 months. I watched them deploy again and again. That droning hum echoing across battlefields, from toxic swamps to frozen tundra to the twisted corridors of hive cities that had been corrupted by 11 years of heretical rule. I watched them walk into kill zones that had claimed entire battalions, watched them absorb casualties that would have broken any other regiment, watched them continue forward with that same terrible calm that I had first witnessed on Tertius, and I watched the heretics break, not slowly, not gradually. The breaking, when it came, was sudden and complete. I saw it happen on Korvax Septimus, the final world of the campaign, where the enlightened path had concentrated their remaining forces for a last stand. 40,000 heretics dug into bunkers and trenches and void, shielded fortresses, supported by corrupted armor and stolen artillery, and even a handful of demonic entities that had been summoned by the cult's most devoted adherents. The Severan 44th numbered less than 2,000 by then. 18 months of continuous combat had worn them down, replacements barely keeping pace with attrition. 2,000 soldiers against 40,000, and they began their advance at dawn. By midday, the heretics were surrendering, not fighting to the death, not fleeing in panic, but surrendering. Thousands of them, streaming out of their fortifications with their hands raised, their weapons discarded, their faces showing an expression I had never seen on heretics before. It took me a long time to identify it, to put a name to what I was seeing. It was not fear. I knew fear, had seen it on 1,000 faces across 100 battlefields. It was not despair, not resignation, not even exhaustion. It was relief. They were relieved that it was over. Relieved that the humming had stopped, that the figures in blood, red carapace had stopped advancing, that they no longer had to watch their companions fall to those precise, economical shots. They were relieved to surrender because surrender meant they did not have to face the Severan 44th anymore. Death at the hands of the Imperium's justice, whatever form it took, was preferable to another hour of waiting for those soldiers to reach their lines. I interviewed some of them afterward, before they were processed and shipped to penal battalions or execution grounds. I wanted to understand. I needed to understand what they had experienced, what had finally broken them after 11 years of successful resistance. One man, a former overseer in the cult's hierarchy, a commander who had led thousands into battle against Imperial forces, spoke to me for nearly an hour. He had been captured trying to flee with the cult's leadership, had watched the Severan 44th cut through his personal guard with that same terrible efficiency that marked all their kills. His hands shook as he talked, and his eyes kept darting to the walls of the interrogation cell as if he expected something to come through them. "They don't react," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We hit them with everything. Artillery barrages, massed fire, traps, ambushes, everything we had, and they didn't react. Didn't scatter, didn't take cover, didn't do any of the things soldiers are supposed to do when you try to kill them. They just adjusted, shifted their formation to fill the gaps, stepped over their own dead, kept coming, like we weren't even there, like we were an inconvenience." He swallowed hard. "You know what the worst part was? The singing. That sound they make, it never stopped. Not when we killed them, not when they killed us, not even when they paused to reload. Just that constant drone getting louder as they got closer. We started hearing it in our sleep, started hearing it in silence, when there was no sound at all. Some of our soldiers went mad from it, just started screaming and running toward the sound, running toward them, because anything was better than waiting." His hands tightened on the edge of the table. "I've fought the Imperium for 11 years. I've killed hundreds of your soldiers, seen thousands more die. I've faced Space Marines, actual Astartes, the Emperor's chosen, and lived to tell the tale. But those—" he shook his head. "The angels of death, you can understand. They're monsters. Weapons. They were made to kill and they do it well. But the Severan 44th, they're people. You can see it in them, under the armor and the masks and the conditioning. You can see the humans they used to be. And they kill you anyway. They walk through your fire, and they sing their terrible song, and they kill you anyway. And when it's over they treat your body with more care than your own commanders ever did." He looked up at me then, and I saw tears in his eyes, not tears of grief or fear, but something else, something I did not understand until much later. "That's why we surrendered," he said. "Not because we couldn't fight. We could have held them off for days, maybe weeks, if we'd been willing to pay the price. But what was the point? What was this point of dying like that, for leaders who promised us freedom and gave us slavery, when the alternative was—" He gestured helplessly. "When the alternative was being killed by people who still remembered what humanity meant, who would count our bodies and record our names and honor our deaths, even as they condemned us." I filed my report 3 days later. It was 47 pages long, filled with statistics and tactical analysis and recommendations for future deployments. The Munitorum processed it, archived it, filed it away in some vast data repository where it would gather dust until some future researcher stumbled upon it. Just another document in the endless bureaucracy of the Imperium's wars. But I kept a copy. I still have it all these years later. And I read it sometimes, when I cannot sleep, when the memories of Korvax and the campaigns that followed pressed too heavily on my mind. I read it to remind myself of what I learned, of why the Heretic commanders fear the Astra Militarum's elite regiments more than they fear the angels of death themselves. It is not the killing. Everyone kills, in the grim darkness of the far future. It is not the efficiency, not the conditioning, not even the relentless advance that continues regardless of casualties or opposition. Those things are terrifying, yes, but terror alone does not win wars. Terror can be resisted, can be channeled into desperate action, can fuel the kind of fanatical resistance that turns every battle into a meat grinder. What wins wars? What truly breaks the enemy, shatters their will to fight, makes their commanders send those desperate messages to dark patrons begging for reinforcement or retreat, is something far more subtle, far more human. It is the fact that the elite regiments of the Astra Militarum have found something that the heretics, for all their promises of power and freedom, cannot match. They have found purpose. Not the desperate grasping for meaning that drives the cultist, not the twisted devotion that fuels the chaos worshipper, not even the simple loyalty of the common soldier who fights for home and hearth and the comrades at his side. The Severan 44th, and regiments like them, have found a purpose that transcends survival, transcends victory, transcends even the abstract concepts of duty and honor that military organizations use to motivate their soldiers. They have found a purpose that makes death irrelevant, that makes fear a minor inconvenience, that makes the infinite horrors of the galaxy into nothing more than obstacles to be overcome. They fight for the idea that humanity matters, that every life, even the lives of those they kill, has value, that the Imperium, for all its cruelty and oppression, represents something worth preserving, not because it is good, not because it is just, but because it is human. And in a galaxy filled with horrors that would consume humanity without a second thought, that simple assertion of worth is the most powerful weapon of all. The heretic commanders understand this, on some level. They understand it because many of them were once part of the Imperium themselves, once believed in its values, once wore its uniform and carried its weapons and fought beneath its banners. They understand it because they rejected it, chose instead the false promises of the dark gods, or the seductive whispers of Xeno's manipulators, or simply the desperate hope that anything would be better than the grinding oppression of imperial life. And when they face the elite regiments, they are forced to confront the truth that their choices were wrong. Not because the Imperium is kind, not because it offers a better life, not because victory against it is impossible, but because the soldiers they face have found something they never did, something that makes those soldiers willing to die, willing to kill, willing to endure any hardship and overcome any obstacle, not out of fear, not out of hatred, but out of love, love for humanity, love for the idea that human beings matter, that their lives have meaning, that the death of every heretic and the death of every loyal soldier alike is a tragedy that must be honored and recorded and remembered. That is what terrifies the heretic commanders. That is why they fear the Astra Militarum's elite regiments more than they fear anything else in the galaxy. Because you cannot fight love with hate. I know this now, sitting in this cold room with the recording servitor watching and the chrono counting down the minutes. I know it because I spent 23 years in the service of the Imperium after Korvax 23 years watching elite regiments deploy and return, watching their casualty lists grow and their ranks replenish, watching them win victories that should have been impossible against enemies that should have been unstoppable. I watched, and I counted, and I learned, and now I am telling you, whoever will hear this recording, whoever will process this confession and file it away in some forgotten archive, I am telling you because you need to understand. Because the galaxy is dark and filled with horrors beyond imagination, and somewhere out there, heretic commanders are even now plotting their rebellions and planning their defenses and whispering to their followers that the Imperium can be defeated, but they know the truth. They know that when the elite regiments come, the Severan 44th, the Armageddon Steel Legion, the Harakoni Warhawks, the Elysian Drop Troops, all the proud and terrible regiments that have been forged in the fires of 1,000 campaigns, when they come, the rebellion is already over. The heretics might fight, they might resist, they might even win temporary victories, hold positions for days or weeks or months. But in the end, they will break. They will break because they cannot match what those soldiers carry with them. The purpose, the conviction, the terrible, unyielding love for humanity that makes them willing to walk through fire and emerge on the other side still counting, still honoring, Still caring about every single life they take, I was the one who counted the bodies after Varkos fell, and after Korvax, and after a dozen other worlds whose names I can barely remember. I counted them because someone had to. Because they mattered, even in death, even as heretics and traitors and enemies of everything the Imperium represents. And that, in the end, is why we win. That is why the heretic commanders fear us. Because we remember. Because we count. Because even in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, we still love. The chrono on the wall shows that my time is almost up. The recording servitor's eyes have begun to flicker, its memory banks nearly full. Soon, someone will come to collect this confession, to process it, to decide what value it holds for the endless bureaucracy of the administratum. I do not know what will happen to me after that. I do not know if I will be retired, or reassigned, or quietly disposed of in some efficiency coal that requires my slot for a younger, more capable administrator. It does not matter. What matters is that these words have been recorded, that somewhere, in some archive, there will be a record of what I learned in 23 years of service. The heretic commanders fear the elite regiments of the Astra Militarum. Now you know why. And perhaps, if you are a young aide, D-camp, just beginning your service, just receiving your first taste of the war that will consume the rest of your life, perhaps this will help you understand what you are part of. Perhaps it will help you find your own purpose, your own conviction, your own terrible love for the species that has survived 10,000 years of unending horror. Or perhaps not. Perhaps this will be filed and forgotten, lost in the endless archives of the Imperium's bureaucracy, never to be read by anyone again. It does not matter. I counted the bodies. I honored the dead. I fulfilled my purpose. And that, in the end, is all any of us can hope for. The Emperor protects.